I never anticipated. It's really hard to look at that gate and think that that's the gate my sister went through, like to the gates of hell.
Giuffre's brother and sister-in-law offered to meet us near the ranch, where they saw for the first time this cross bearing Virginia's name.
You know, we know that a lot of pain here happened, but like part of you just wants to feel close to her. So it is beautiful to see her represented in a beautiful way.
When Giuffre came to Zorro, she preferred to sleep not at what she called the castle, but in a cottage closer to the stables, where on her early morning rides, she writes, I could remember what it felt like to be free.
She wouldn't even stay up there. She would stay down here because she felt more connected to nature. And this was all about like trauma and, you know, the horrors that would happen behind those doors. But also, I mean, look around us. Like, there's nowhere to go, Hallie. I mean, there's nowhere to go.
It almost gives
7,500 acres of desert, one of the most powerful predators in modern American history, and surveillance footage that could have named every single person who walked through those gates. Deleted, gone, exposed to the world only in fragments, and even those fragments the federal government is still fighting to keep sealed. This is the story they don't want you to piece together. The story of Zorro Ranch, Jeffrey Epstein's sprawling New Mexico compound, where survivors say unspeakable horrors played out for over a decade while the most powerful people in America looked the other way. Epstein bought that land in 1993, purchased directly from New Mexico's former governor, renamed it Zorro, and turned it into a 26,000 square foot fortress sitting at the end of a long dirt road between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, miles from the nearest neighbor, miles from anyone who could hear a scream. At least 10 girls and young women have come forward saying they were groomed or assaulted on that property. Annie Farmer was 16 years old when Epstein flew her out there in 1996, told she'd be joining other college hopefuls volunteering overseas, and instead found herself alone with a predator who crawled into her bed. Shanti Davies has said publicly she was raped twice at Zorro. A Jane Doe testified in court that Epstein sexually assaulted her there when she was just 15, saying she felt so small and powerless she couldn't move. Rachel Benavidez, a young massage therapist, remembers the multiple security checkpoints on the way in, the isolation, the fear, and the
Passed multiple security checks in her 20s.
It was very intimidating, and I always wondered if something would happen to me. There was a sense of fear, there was a sense of isolation.
Newly certified as a massage therapist, she met Epstein a couple months later, and that's when she says she was sexually assaulted by him repeatedly.
After the 2 years that I was assaulted, raped, abused, I just completely shut down.
Pressured to return again and again.
I wasn't protected as a child, and so my whole life I just didn't know how to handle myself around men, you know.
Benavidez has rarely spoken publicly before.
Until we are heard, until survivors are heard and believed, then I don't think there's ever going to be any justice.
Does it feel like there were missed chances to hold him accountable?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
repeated sexual assaults she endured over 2 years before she completely shut down. These women were trapped on a property designed to make escape impossible, surrounded by nothing but desert and silence. And here is where the story turns into something far darker than one man's crimes. In 2019, after Epstein's arrest and death, a local radio host named Aragon received an anonymous email tip.
Stuff since inception. So naturally, a lot of people with concern were picking up the phone and calling me with various tips or ideas.
One of those tips, an unsigned email, came later that fall.
The big part of email that really impacted my decision to call the FBI is the fact that you had mention of 2 women buried in the hills outside Zorro Ranch. 2 younger girls where they had engaged and died in rough fetish sex. And so That was very definitely a red flag.
It's why he says he reported it immediately.
We went in and we itemized the various components of that email. That was it, and I never heard from the FBI again.
By that point, Epstein had been dead for months after
claiming 2 women were buried in the hills outside Zorro Ranch, killed during what the email described as rough fetish encounters. Aragon did exactly what any citizen should do. He called the FBI, itemized every detail in that email, handed it over, and then never heard from the Bureau again. Not a follow-up call, not an update, nothing. Meanwhile, federal investigators searched Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, raided his Palm Beach estate, combed through his Caribbean island. But when it came to Zorro Ranch, the FBI told a top official they simply did not have probable cause to search. 7,500 acres, where survivors were abused for years, where an anonymous tip alleged bodies were buried, and the FBI said they didn't have enough reason to look. New Mexico's Attorney General at the time, Hector Balderas, had opened his own state investigation, but the Southern District of New York told his office to stand down, claiming they didn't want duplicate testimony that could jeopardize the federal case. Balderas complied, because that's standard procedure.
And into Epstein, until the Southern District of New York asked his office to stand down.
As soon as we began investigating in the summer of 19, we were contacted by the New York DOJ, and they asked us to stop interviewing some of the survivors that we were both targeting. And that was for reasons that they didn't want to create duplicate testimony and potentially put at risk the case.
Did that seem reasonable to you?
On the front end, yes, that's very common. You pick who's got the bigger hammer and you work together.
What was unusual, he says, is how federal prosecutors then went dark instead of sharing information later that could have helped New Mexico bring state charges.
We assumed, with their reputation for being aggressive, that they were going to be aggressive and then share that evidence with us. It was a very simple 1-2 punch.
And that's happened before in other cases.
Absolutely.
But it didn't happen here.
It didn't happen here, and every lawmaker and investigators asked.
The bigger hammer takes the lead and then shares the evidence. Except the feds never shared anything. They went completely dark. No evidence, no files, no cooperation. Balderas didn't even learn about the buried bodies tip until the Justice Department started releasing Epstein files years later.
No probable cause to search the ranch, and he had never heard, for example, about the unsubstantiated tip referencing buried bodies shared with the FBI, which is not commenting on that, nor is the DOJ. Balderas only discovered it all when the Justice Department started releasing its Epstein files last year.
I think that it is embarrassing and appalling. I believe the first cover-up was in 2019 with me.
The former Justice Department official who helped lead the DOJ's Epstein investigation at the time did not respond to our request for comment. And a current DOJ spokesperson says if new investigations uncover potential federal crimes, we stand ready to work closely with our law enforcement partners to prosecute.